You think you know David Phelps. You've heard that voice, the one that can shatter glass and mend hearts in the same breath. You've seen him command stages from rural church sanctuaries to sold-out concert halls. But here's what most people miss, and it's the detail that changes everything. The man behind that extraordinary tenor didn't chase fame, didn't hunger for the spotlight, and almost walked away from it all multiple times. This is the story of how a college professor's son from Texas became one of the most influential voices in Christian music, and why the most interesting parts of his journey are the ones he rarely talks about. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will completely reshape how you understand not just David Phelps, but what it truly means to build a legacy that matters. The 21st of October, 1969. A child was born in Texas who would grow up to redefine what gospel music could sound like. But David Norris Phelps didn't enter the world on a stage or in a recording studio. He entered it in a home where dinner table conversations mixed mathematical equations with hymn lyrics, where his father, Gene, a college professor, would debate philosophy while his mother, Mary Ella, a music teacher, would hum melodies that seemed to float through the rooms like prayers made audible. This wasn't just a musical household. It was an ecosystem designed, almost accidentally, to create someone who could bridge worlds that rarely touch. The intellectual and the spiritual, the classical and the contemporary, the sacred and the universally human. Young David didn't just learn to sing in this environment. He learned that music was a language that could say things words alone never could. That a well-placed note could communicate truths that sermons sometimes missed. His sister Sherry would go on to perform in Southern gospel circles, proving that the Phelps family didn't just appreciate music, they were hardwired for it, carrying something in their DNA that made sound and soul inseparable. But here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn, and this is crucial to understanding everything that follows. David Phelps received classical training. He studied vocal performance with the kind of rigor usually reserved for opera houses and symphony halls. He learned technique that could carry him into the most elite musical circles in the world. He could have pursued a career where his name appeared on playbid programs at Carnegie Hall, where critics in tuxedos would analyze his vibrato and breath control. That path was wide open to him, and many people with his gifts would have sprinted toward it without looking back. But David felt something pulling him in a different direction, something that formal training couldn't quite capture or explain. It was the gospel music he grew up hearing, those anthems that weren't just performed but experienced, where every note carried the weight of testimony, and every crescendo felt like an encounter with something transcendent. Classical music could showcase his technical brilliance, but gospel music spoke to what he believed his voice was actually for. This internal tension, this choice between prestige and purpose, would become the defining characteristic of his entire career, and it's the reason his music connects with people in ways that pure technical mastery never could. The year 1997 should be circled in red on any timeline of contemporary Christian music. That's when David Phelps joined the Gaither Vocal Band, led by gospel music legend Bill Gaither, and everything changed. Not just for David, but for what audiences expected gospel music could be. When Phelps opened his mouth during those first performances, something happened that veteran concertgoers still talk about decades later. His tenor voice didn't just hit high notes, it seemed to unlock something in the room, creating moments where time stopped and the boundary between performance and spiritual experience dissolved completely. People who attended those early Gaither Vocal Band concerts with Phelps describe a phenomenon that's difficult to articulate. Grown men weeping, skeptics finding themselves moved despite their resistance, moments of collective transcendence that felt less like entertainment and more like church services conducted in perfect pitch. David became known for taking songs that audiences had heard 1,000 times and making them feel brand new, making them feel dangerous again, in the best possible way. He had this ability, and still does, to find the emotional core of a lyric and amplify it until it became impossible to ignore. But let me tell you what nobody talks about when they discuss those glory years with the Gaither Vocal Band. And this is where we start to see the real David Phelps emerge. Behind the standing ovations and the albums that topped Christian music charts, behind the tours that crisscrossed continents and the acclaim that kept building, David was wrestling with questions that success usually silences. He was asking himself whether fame was the same thing as faithfulness, whether filling arenas meant he was actually fulfilling his calling, whether the applause was drowning out something more important. These weren't the thoughts of someone ungrateful or dissatisfied. They were the thoughts of someone who understood that the spotlight can illuminate and blind simultaneously, that you can gain the whole world of gospel music and lose something essential in the process. David watched other performers, saw how the industry could consume people, how the pressure to maintain relevance could twist ministry into mere career management, how the constant travel could fracture families, and how the persona demanded by public life could eclipse the private person trying to live with integrity. He saw these patterns clearly, and he made a decision that shocked many people in the industry. He would do things differently, even if it meant sacrificing opportunities others would kill for. Now let's talk about Lori Purtle Phelps, because you cannot understand David's story without understanding this partnership. Lori wasn't just some supportive spouse standing in the shadows. She was a professional trumpet player, a musician in her own right who understood the demands and temptations of a performance career from the inside out. When David and Lori built their life together, they made choices that seemed almost countercultural in the entertainment world. They decided their marriage would come before the ministry, that their 4 children, Caleb, Grant, Maggie, Beth, and David Weston, would know their father as a present participant in their lives, not just a voice on recordings or a figure who appeared between tours. The Phelps family settled on an expansive farm in Tennessee, deliberately choosing space and quiet over proximity to industry hubs. They created an environment where success was measured not by chart positions, but by dinner table laughter, where achievements were marked not by award nominations, but by watching their children discover their own gifts. Maggie, Beth, and Caleb both inherited musical talent, sometimes performing with their father, creating moments where the audience witnesses not just artistry, but authentic family connection. This farm, this intentional refuge they built, represents something radical in an industry built on visibility and constant engagement. David Phelps essentially said no to the traditional model of celebrity ministry, the one where you maximize exposure and monetize every opportunity. He said no to the pressure to always be on, always be touring, always be building the brand. Instead, he built something that couldn't be photographed or promoted. A life with roots, with rhythms of rest, with protected spaces where he could be simply David and not David Phelps, gospel music icon. And here's what's remarkable. This choice didn't diminish his impact. If anything, it deepened it. Because when David steps onto a stage now, when he opens his mouth to sing, audiences sense something increasingly rare in our perform-to-death culture. They sense authenticity. They sense someone who isn't performing a carefully constructed image, but sharing from a well-protected inner life, someone who has something to give because he hasn't given everything away. But let's address what success and sustainability really cost, because David's journey hasn't been without its shadows and struggles. Over the years, fans have noticed periods when David stepped back from touring, times when he seemed to vanish from the relentless schedule that gospel music demands. Some of these absences were due to vocal strain, the inevitable result of pushing an instrument as extraordinary as his voice to its limits, night after night. The human voice, no matter how gifted, is still flesh and cartilage, still subject to fatigue and damage. David has had to learn, sometimes the hard way, that stewarding his gift means knowing when to rest it, when to let silence restore what sound has depleted. Other breaks were prompted by family health concerns, moments when the people he loved most needed him present, not performing. And some absences were simply about recognizing that the pace demanded by the industry isn't sustainable for a human being who wants to remain whole, who wants to finish well, who understands that burning out in service of ministry is still burning out. In recent years, David has become more vocal about topics that remain somewhat taboo in gospel music circles. Mental health, the necessity of Sabbath rest, the dangers of deriving your identity from performance and audience approval. He's talked about the pressure unique to faith-based entertainment, where your work isn't just your career but your calling, where taking a break can feel like failing God, where admitting struggle can seem like admitting weakness of faith. By speaking honestly about these realities, David has given permission to countless other performers and ministry leaders to acknowledge their own exhaustion, their own doubts, their own need for something the industry rarely offers: grace for being human. This kind of transparency doesn't diminish his spiritual credibility. It actually enhances it, because people trust leaders who limp, who admit the journey is hard, who model something more sustainable than superhuman perfection. Now let's talk about artistic evolution, because this is where David Phelps really gets interesting, and where some controversy enters the picture. While many gospel artists find a formula that works and repeat it endlessly, David has consistently pushed boundaries, experimented with genre, incorporated theatrical elements, worked with full orchestras, recorded albums that blend classical arrangements with pop sensibilities, and inspirational ballads that defy easy categorization. Projects like Classic Freedom and The Voice showcase a restless creativity, a refusal to be boxed in by audience expectations or industry conventions. For David, music is exploration, a way of asking questions and discovering answers, a means of connecting with the broadest possible range of human experience. This artistic ambition has won him fans far beyond traditional gospel circles, people who appreciate technical excellence and emotional depth, regardless of genre labels. But here's where things get complicated, and this is important to understand, because it reveals something about the gospel music world and about how we handle change. Some conservative corners of the gospel community criticized David's evolution, suggesting that incorporating more contemporary sounds and theatrical production values represented a departure from gospel roots, perhaps even a compromise of spiritual authenticity for broader appeal. There were whispers, never quite substantiated but persistent nonetheless, about tension between David and other members of the Gaither Vocal Band, speculation about why he would take extended breaks from touring with them, questions about whether his solo ambitions conflicted with group commitments. David has never publicly confirmed internal conflicts, never thrown anyone under the bus, never responded to gossip with gossip. His approach has been to let the work speak for itself, to maintain relationships where possible, and to move forward with grace rather than getting mired in he said, she said narratives. This restraint, this refusal to engage with controversy, is actually one of David's most powerful testimonies. In an era where every public figure seems compelled to defend, explain, and litigate every criticism in real time, David has chosen a different path. He's chosen to trust that character ultimately matters more than reputation management, that longevity comes from consistency, not from winning every public relations battle. When rumors swirl about his personal life or spiritual commitments, when internet speculation tries to fill in gaps with imagination, David largely stays silent, continues working, continues singing, continues showing up for his family and his calling. This isn't weakness or avoidance, it's wisdom. The hard-won understanding that you cannot control what people say about you, but you can control who you actually are when the cameras are off and the crowds have gone home. Let me tell you what makes David Phelps truly exceptional in the landscape of contemporary Christian music, and it has nothing to do with his vocal range, impressive as that is. It's his integration. So many performers compartmentalize their lives. Here's the stage persona, here's the private person, here's the spiritual leader, here's the struggling human. But David has worked to create coherence, to let his private convictions shape his public work, to ensure that what he sings about on stage reflects how he actually lives when he's off it. This integration means turning down opportunities that would compromise family time. It means refusing projects that feel financially lucrative but spiritually hollow. It means accepting that his audience might be smaller because he won't market himself with the aggression the industry often demands. But it also means that when people meet David Phelps in person, they encounter someone remarkably consistent with the man they've seen perform, someone whose humility isn't an act and whose faith isn't a marketing angle. Think about what this means for a generation of young artists watching how he navigates success. David Phelps is modeling something desperately needed. You can be excellent without being exploitative, ambitious without being ruthless, successful without sacrificing the relationships and values that make success meaningful. You can set boundaries, take breaks, prioritize rest, and still have a thriving career. You can evolve artistically without abandoning your core message. You can achieve recognition without making recognition your god. These lessons aren't taught in music schools or artist development programs, but they're infinitely more valuable than technique or marketing strategies. They're lessons about how to sustain a calling for decades, how to finish strong, how to look back on a career and see ministry, not just milestones. David's influence extends into unexpected places. His music appears in churches that still sing shape-note harmonies, and in contemporary worship services with fog machines and light shows. His recordings are studied by voice students learning classical technique and by worship leaders looking for emotional authenticity. His approach to family and faith is discussed in pastoral counseling sessions and family ministry conferences. He's become a reference point, a touchstone for conversations about what faithful artistry can look like, about how to steward extraordinary gifts without letting them possess you. And perhaps most significantly, his music continues to create moments of genuine encounter, times when people hear something beyond notes and lyrics, when they sense the presence of something transcendent, when they're moved in ways they can't quite explain. When David Phelps sings a traditional hymn, he doesn't just perform it, he inhabits it, finds the theology embedded in the melody, the experience encoded in the harmonies, and offers it back to listeners as both gift and invitation. When he sings contemporary material, he brings the same depth, the same refusal to let entertainment eclipse, meaning the same insistence that every song should matter, should say something true, should leave people different than it found them. This consistency of purpose, this unwavering commitment to using his voice for something beyond himself, is what separates David from countless other talented singers who've come and gone in the Christian music scene. As David continues performing and recording, as he enters new phases of life and ministry, the central questions remain the same. How do you maintain integrity in an industry built on image? How do you protect what matters most while still pursuing excellence in public work? How do you age gracefully as a performer without becoming a parody of your younger self? How do you know when to speak up and when to stay silent? How do you measure success when the metrics that matter most can't be quantified? David Phelps doesn't have perfect answers to these questions, but he's lived them honestly, wrestled with them publicly when appropriate, and demonstrated through decades of consistent choices that the questions themselves matter more than easy answers. His legacy, still being written, will ultimately rest on something more durable than vocal acrobatics or award collections. It will rest on having shown multiple generations that you can be fully human and fully committed, that doubt and faith can coexist, that artistic ambition and spiritual authenticity aren't opposites, that the most powerful performances come from the most protected private lives. David Phelps has given Christian music something it desperately needed. Proof that you don't have to choose between excellence and character, between artistry and integrity, between reaching people and remaining grounded. You can have both, but only if you're willing to make choices that look strange to an industry addicted to more, to bigger, to louder, to constant exposure. So when you listen to David Phelps now, listen with fresh ears. You're not just hearing a voice. though it remains one of the finest instruments in contemporary music. You're hearing the sound of choices, sacrifices, convictions, and courage. You're hearing what happens when someone refuses to let the platform change the person, when someone protects their private life fiercely enough that their public work flows from genuine fullness rather than desperate emptiness. You're hearing decades of saying no to shortcuts, no to compromises, no to the easy path that leads to eventual hollowness. And you're hearing yes. Yes to family. Yes to rest. Yes to evolution. Yes to questions. Yes to a vision of success that looks suspiciously like faithfulness. That's the real story of David Phelps, and it's far more compelling than any highlight reel could capture. It's a story still unfolding, still teaching, still inspiring anyone willing to listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts and their lives. Think about your own life for a moment. What are you building, not just in terms of career accomplishments or public recognition, but in terms of the stuff that will actually matter when you look back from the vantage point of decades? Are you protecting the relationships that ground you, or are you sacrificing them on the altar of ambition? Are you taking care of your physical, mental, and spiritual health? Or are you running yourself into the ground in pursuit of goals that might not satisfy even if you reach them? Are you willing to set boundaries, to say no to good opportunities for the sake of better priorities, to accept that you can't do everything and shouldn't try? Are you measuring success by metrics that actually align with your deepest values? Or are you chasing standards imposed by a culture that profits from your restlessness? David Phelps' life asks these questions not with judgment, but with the gentle insistence of someone who's walked the path,